I am Kristoferis Voishka for Lithuanian oppositional press. We could get an interview from you concerning global economic and geopolitical questions. Firstly, we would be very interested to ask, how have you come from the position of having been Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under Reagan to being an outspoken critic of the ruling US establishment and its foreign policy?
Well, the United States government today is very different from Reagan. Reagan focused on American domestic economic issues, and he focused on ending the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Today, or during the entirety of the new 21st century, the American government has focused on war and on American financial imperialism over the rest of the world. This is a dramatic change. And this change, of course, is very dangerous, not only for Americans, but for the entirety of the world. The United States has been at war for 15 years. It has invaded or bombed or attacked 7 countries. There are millions of people dead, injured, displaced. The United States is now bringing pressures to bear against Russia. The United States overthrew an elected government in Ukraine. This is a dangerous act. The United States is pushing conflict in the Ukraine in order to embarrass Russia, in order to hopefully destabilize Russia. And American financial hegemony is being exercised. Sanctions are placed on Russia, credit downratings. These are political acts that have no basis in any economic reality. And so this is not a situation such as the one that existed in the 1980s.
Then we would like to ask specifically, what are your thoughts on the present conflict in Ukraine within the context of the world geopolitical situation and the increasing tensions between Russia and the USA, as well as the American and Zionist influence in making the putsch, so-called Euromaidan?
Yes, the American neoconservatives who came to influence after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and also the American liberal interventionists. These 2 groups dominate the making of American foreign policy, and both groups believe that the United States should be the unipower, that there should be no other power that would be able to block American purposes in the world. And so the rise of Russia and the rise of China are seen as a serious challenge to the American ideology of world hegemony. You may have heard this phrase that Americans are the exceptional people, that the United States is the indispensable country. This sounds a lot like Adolf Hitler. If you are the exceptional people, what does that mean about the other people? That means they are the Untermenschen. And it is this arrogant ideology that says, oh my goodness, look, Russia has recovered under Putin's leadership. It's now again economically capable. It's militarily capable. We can't permit this. So what can we do to cause Russia trouble? Oh, we will attack them through Ukraine. And that's exactly what has happened. The United States spent $5 billion over a decade creating non-governmental organizations inside Ukraine that could call people into the streets. They cultivated political types so they would have a puppet government to take office. And so this now has brought serious problems to Russia and is being used by the United States to break off Russian economic and political relationships with Europe. The main function of the sanctions is not really to hit Russia, it's to break up the economic relationships between Europe and Russia, because Europe was having growing economic relations with Russia, and the United States said these may pull the Europeans out of our orbit. They may cease following our foreign policy. They may cease following our economic policy. They may develop this sort of new relationship with Russia, and Washington will lose control. So that's the main function of the sanctions, to destroy the growing political and economic relations between Europe and Russia. So clearly the United States has a strategy. It is working for them. Anytime some European vassal state, such as France, expresses a point of view different to the American one, something happens. Charlie Hebdo, whether this was a real terrorist attack, whether this was a black op, false flag operation, it doesn't matter, because the result has been to pull France back into the American orbit. We no longer hear the French president saying that the sanctions against Russia must end. We no longer hear the French president saying that France votes for the Palestinians against Israel and America. All of that's over. So this strategy that the United States has developed against Russia is working, and it creates problems for Russia. And the Russians are being, in response, very unprovocative. They don't actually strike back. And so the consequences of this American policy they remain to be revealed.
What about the rise of China as a superior economic power, and the whole BRICS as an opposition to the American hegemony?
Yes, these countries have formed, or trying to form, an economic and political organization that is independent of the American-dominated Western one. For so long, the world simply accepted the American-dominated payment system, the dollar, as the world reserve currency, and the American rules of participating in the international economy. And the rest of the world has found that America uses this position, this preeminent economic position, to bully other countries and to support its financial and economic interests over others. That it's not exactly a fair system and where everyone is treated the same. And so we see that Russia, China, India are trying to create a different system that they can operate in that leaves them safe from American domination. So China, Russia, these economies are complementary. There's no reason for either country to turn to the Western capital markets for financing. There's no reason for these countries to use the dollar, because the use of the dollar supports American power. It supports the value of the American currency, which should be in trouble as a result of the massive amount of new money creation in the United States in the last 6 years. the massive amount of debt. The American debt as a share of gross domestic product is 10 times higher than the Russian. So why is the Russian credit downgraded, but not Washington's credit? It's too much politics. And so the BRICS are trying to remove themselves from a system dominated by Washington's politics.
Another question would be, what is your opinion about the dramatic fall in the oil price and the claim of Venezuela's President Maduro that this is an attempt on behalf of the Western establishment to undermine oil-dependent countries that are opposed to U.S. hegemony, such as Russia, Iran, Venezuela, etc.?
I have no inside information, and that could actually be the case. Could be actually directed at Venezuela and Russia. On the other hand, it appears to be damaging also the American fracking industry. It's a high-cost way of recovering oil and gas, and the drop in the price of oil has made the debt of these fracking companies unpayable, and therefore it is a potential large financial problem, as derivatives are now associated with the loans that the fracking companies in the United States took out. So it is not just Venezuela and Russia that are affected by this. So if it is Washington's doing, does it mean Washington has decided to sacrifice the American fracking industry in order to harm Russia and Venezuela? Perhaps. There are other explanations. One is simply that the world economy is turned down, and that the demand for energy has turned down, and therefore the price has gone with it. It's entirely possible that the high price of oil previous to the downturn was due to Wall Street, the speculative power of Wall Street to drive prices up, to drive them down. So I don't know the answer, but I certainly don't discount the statement of the president of Venezuela. It's entirely possible.
Another question. When speaking, you have already mentioned the Charlie Hebdo shooting, which, according to one article you wrote, is a possible false flag operation by the CIA. Maybe you could share more insight into the terrorism in France.
Well, the episode has many characteristics of being pre-planned, orchestrated. For example, the story that it was the two brothers who attacked the office of the French cartoonist. This has all the appearances of being pre-packaged. It was ready. It was already there, ready to release. That's suspicious. If they knew nothing about the attack in advance, how did they already have the story ready? It doesn't make a lot of sense. There are other differences. Many people have noticed these differences, and I still receive from European readers more differences and more differences on what they say the facts are compared to the official story. The two professional killers who attacked the cartoonist's office show every indication of being highly trained, highly organized. They show absolutely no confusion. They come in and destroy an office, a number of people, and have no difficulty leaving, and nobody can get in their way and stop them. And yet 2 days later, allegedly the same people come across as bungling, confused, incompetent. Another curious aspect of it is the so-called terrorists are all shot down and killed when it was easy to capture them. So if I kill them, if you can capture them, one reason is they're not the same people. And you don't want to have to question them. You don't want them to speak. So these are many of the aspects. Plus, who does it serve? Well, it served, as I said earlier, to shut up the French president. He's no longer talking about we have to stop the sanctions against Russia. He's no longer prepared to vote for the Palestinians against the Israelis. So the Roman question was always, who benefits? And clearly, the Muslims didn't benefit.
Oh, another question in relation to this, and the comment. In our country, if you even allude to the possibility that there would be such a false flag or something, they will immediately, well, the mainstream will immediately start a hysteria that you are a Russian agent or a fifth column or that you're not patriotic and stuff like this. And what do you think of the position of such a small country like Lithuania or others in the Eastern Central European region whose governments are hysterically joining this warmongering against Russia? What is your opinion?
Yes, well, Lithuania is a vassal state of the United States. The Lithuanian government represents Washington. It does not represent Lithuanians. What interests do Lithuanians have in conflict with Russia? None. It's a stupid thing. It's a risky thing. If the United States starts a war between NATO and Russia, what do the Lithuanians think is going to happen to them?
Total destruction.
They're on the front line. There's not going to be any American army to stop the Russians from overrunning Lithuania if Washington starts a war. Lithuania has nothing to gain from this, and yet the Lithuanian government serves Washington. It doesn't serve Lithuania. And your point that you're not allowed to question official explanations, such as Charlie Hebdo, this is more evidence that something is wrong with the official explanation. If the official explanation was correct and safe, they wouldn't care who questioned it. They would say, yes, those are good questions. Let's look at them. Here are the answers. Instead, they say, oh, no, you mustn't. If you question it, it means you're a conspiracy coup. You're a Russian agent. This is to stop people from noticing, from thinking. And so it is another reason to suspect the official case. Anytime they try to shout down dissent, skepticism, you know something wrong.
We would like to return shortly to American issues. When there is this isolation of Russia, but also, well, attempts to isolate Russia would be more correct, and the rising of the BRICS and Russia, China making exchanges in their own national currencies, what do you think will be, in the long-term perspective, the future for the dollar currency, and how will this impact on the social economic development of America?
If the BRICS are successful, if they develop a payments mechanism that they can use for their trade, both among themselves and with other parts of the world, and this payment mechanism does not use dollars, in this particular being the case with energy, then the demand for dollars in the world market falls. And therefore, it becomes harder for the United States to maintain the current value of its currency. If currency becomes less and less and less used as the world reserve currency, this means the ability of the United States to continue to pay its bills by printing money becomes impaired. One of the greatest sources of American power is the fact that the dollar is the world reserve currency, because this permits Washington to command resources simply by printing paper money. This is an unusual power. No one else has this power. So as long as your currency is the reserve currency and everyone is willing to hold it as their main source of national savings or reserves for the central banks, then Washington can command resources simply by printing money. They don't have to produce something to sell, to earn the foreign currencies with which to command the resources. They simply print paper. So if that advantage is lost to Washington, Washington's power is also gone. Now, I think this is what is going to happen. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think it's going to happen because Washington has created so much debt, so much new paper dollars, that the output of real goods and services cannot support it. The money has been growing much faster than the economy. The debt has been growing much faster than the economy. So how does the economy, in the end, support the massive increase in money and debt? It can't. Now, as the world realizes that, and as the world pulls away from that system, the power of the United States will decline. I don't know how long this will take. I thought it would be more rapid. But the United States is a very clever overlord. It has the Bank of Japan printing yen. It now has the European Central Bank printing euros. So those are the other two large currencies. So if those currencies are being printed in profusion, it supports the value of the dollar. The dollar can't fall relative to the yen or the euro when the other central banks are printing money also. So as long as all the large currencies are printed, it supports the dollar. And because the EU and Japan are American vassal states, they follow orders from Washington. So Washington can hold this together for a long time. But as the world leaves that system, if the BRICS are successful, then that starts impairing the power of Washington to pay its bills by printing money.
Concerning the euro, there is a very interesting fact that in Lithuania the euro was recently introduced, actually this month. Though more than 50% of people in Lithuania were and still are against it. So many commentators from around the world say that this is absolute stupidity, because besides the fact that it undermines the remnants of formal national sovereignty that we have, it is a suicide potentially, because the eurozone may collapse. So how would you evaluate such an action of the government to put us into the eurozone?
Well, when the Lithuanian government accepted the euro, your government accepted a loss of sovereignty. You cannot be a sovereign state if you don't have your own money. If you don't have your own money, you can't finance your own government. So this is all the troubles that we see in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, in Ireland, in Italy. These are governments that are not sovereign because they don't have their own money, and therefore they cannot finance themselves. They have to rely on foreign private banks to finance them, and these creditors are more powerful than the governments, and so when the countries have difficulty paying, the creditors can impose austerity on them and loot the countries. You know, Greece is being looted. You know, how do you loot the country? You tell them they have to cut, their pensions have to be cut, employment has to be cut, social services have to be cut so that there's money to pay the banks. Also, you have to sell off your valuable public enterprises, your valuable public lands, the state lottery in Greece, the municipal water companies, the ports. You have to sell your national islands to real estate developers. And so this is how countries are looted. So anytime a country gives up its currency, it has given up its sovereignty. And that is what Lithuania did when it accepted the euro. It said, okay, we were not any longer sovereign.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of repetitive, but even with when you say you are against the euro, they also say you are a Russian agent. Like, and this makes me think that most probably it's very connected with the fact that euro is important for the preservation of the dollar. So maybe our government did this to, how to say, to get under the skin of its American masters.
Well, if you take the euro, why doesn't that make you an EU agent?
I don't know.
If you took the ruble, if you took the ruble, they could say, "Oh, you're a Russian agent." But if that's the case, then if you take the euro, why aren't you an EU agent, and thereby an American agent? Because the EU is not independent of Washington. So it works both ways.
Well, sadly, most don't notice that. Another question, returning to America. Being an American yourself who opposes the mainstream foreign and other policies of the government, how do you feel about the fact that the popularity of America is going even lower and lower and lower, and people are getting angry at it all over the world because what is going on? And how do ordinary American people, like from the street, from a village somewhere, how do they view all this Russians are attacking rhetoric?
I don't think the ordinary American knows that the popularity of the United States is falling abroad. No one tells them. Americans are told they're the exceptional people. They're indispensable and they have to rule. And so that's as far as it goes. You know, I've often said that the United States had its high standing in the world because of the long-term opposition to the Soviet Union. It was easy to demonize the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it was easy for the United States to appear to be the white hat, you know, the good person in this conflict that stood up to the evil, oppressive Soviets. And so the whole world had that picture for decades throughout the entirety of the Cold War. So the United States inherited this great moral leadership. And it's taken the world a long time to see that the United States can be just as self-serving as the Soviets, can be just as brutal to other people, in fact, more so, can be just as exploitative. And it's taken the world a long time to learn that. And they're now starting to see that. They've seen war after war based on lies. Most of the people in the world now understand Saddam Hussein had no weapons of of mass destruction. They understand the lies against Libya and Gaddafi. They understand the lies against Syria. And so they began to question the great moral standing of the United States, which is invading, bombing, drones, more and more people killed. I mean, the United States is conducting war against the populations of Pakistan and Yemen, even though the United States is not officially at war with these countries. The governments of these countries have permitted the United States to kill their citizens. They haven't said, hey, you're conducting war against us, stop. Pakistan hasn't said, we've got nuclear weapons, stop, or we're going to use them. So when you see the governments of countries permit Americans to kill their own people with practically no protests, people start wondering about the goodness of the United States. And therefore, the reputation of the United States is declining. In my view, this is important because the arrogance of the American neoconservatives is driving the world to a world war. And that war would be nuclear, and there would be nobody left standing. And this threat is the main threat. It overrides all other threats, all other considerations. It overrides patriotism, my country. It's life.
And how to avoid such a war?
People have to continue to wake up. The governments that sell out their own populations and align with Washington, those governments have to be exposed. They have to be opposed. They have to be criticized. They have to stand up to those governments. So Russia was hoping that Europe would realize that the interests of Europe are different than the interests of the United States, and that the pressure the United States was putting on Europe to put sanctions on Russia would wake the Europeans up and make them realize they were being used to their own disadvantage in order to support American hegemony over Russia. But the Europeans have been very slow to wake up. A lot of the people have. For example, the German industrialists, French industrialists. But the governments, no. The governments don't wake up. Or if they start to wake up, something happens, like Charlie Hebdo.
In relation partially to Charlie Hebdo, there is this whole Islamic real or supposed threat, and the question would be, what do you think about the so-called Islamic State and the probably true, I guess, allegations that America is actually sponsoring the Islamism, the Wahhabism, and the war in Syria?
Yes, my opinion is that the fighters that comprise the military power of what is now called the Islamic State, these were people initially recruited by Washington and used against Gaddafi in Libya. These were people that Washington put together, recruited, and used in Libya. And then Washington sent them to Syria to overthrow Assad. But along the way, these people became independent, perhaps, of Washington. And it seems the strength of this movement, which is new and surprising, is that Muslims are supporting it because Muslims are tired of being ruled by the West. The Muslims are tired of American, British, French domination of the Muslim world, which has been happening since World War I. So we have here now 100 years of Western exploitation, Western oppression of the Muslim Middle East and North Africa. And so they are using this opportunity, this military force, to try to remake the Middle East in a way that is independent of Western control. And that's what the Islamic State, it seems to me, is becoming. Initially, groups organized by Washington to overthrow Washington's enemies, Gaddafi, Assad, and they realize in their own power that this is an opportunity to create a new state, to overcome all the artificial boundaries created by the French and British in the Middle East, the artificial boundaries between the different Muslim sects. And so what we may be witnessing here is the rise of a new kind of Islamic leadership. And this was not expected by Washington when they organized these people for Washington's purposes. So that, I think, is the surprise. And it may be that this Islamic State will attract more and more support of Muslims. Remains to be seen. It's a very brutal operation, but that is often the case when new governments or new entities, new state entities, are created because the old puppet entities are in the way. And so they have to be got rid of. That's just my speculation. I can't prove that. I wouldn't bet my life on it. But I do think that that may be what we're witnessing. We're witnessing the rise of a new kind of Islamic entity that is fed up with Western domination.
Well, and let's say if the conflict in the Middle East escalates and if the BRICS bloc will succeed to create an alternative power base to the USA, then in your opinion, in how much time would the so-called multipolar world develop and America would be reduced just to one regional power out of many? Would this happen in a quick implosion, or would it be a gradual process?
It's hard to know. There are many reasons for American economic and strategic weakness. This overreach. The United States cannot possibly conduct wars against the Middle East, Iran, Russia, and China simultaneously. There's no such power. The United States is busy with all kinds of manipulation and rigging of financial markets, trying to hold it together. Anytime the stock market starts to correct, the plunge protection team can step in and buy Standard & Poor futures and drive the prices back up. Anytime gold starts to take off, making the dollar look bad, the bullion banks, agents of the central bank, can go in and sell uncovered shorts in the futures market and drive the gold price down. All these manipulations in my time with Treasury would have been unthinkable. And yet they're all used and they help hold the system together. How long can this system hold together? I don't know. It could gradually fall apart, or it could go all at once. For example, if there were to be a run on the dollar, as may be developing on the euro, if people say, we just want to get out of this currency, we don't trust it any longer, it's going to drop in value, then as people leave it, it will make it drop in value. So that can happen. It could be a sudden thing. But you would have to know what would make that happen. Mm-hmm. Maybe if the American economy, which is not recovered, turns down further, that might shake confidence in the currency. It could cause a flight. If people left the dollar in droves, what if the Chinese were to convert all of their dollar-denominated assets into dollars and then sell the dollars? That would destroy the dollar. There's too many of them to come onto the market. So these things are called black swans. They could happen. They're not predictable. The consequences could be catastrophic. On the other hand, Washington seems very capable of rigging, manipulating, using power very effectively. And so it could keep the system alive a long time. Or you could see simply the rise of another system, the BRICS, operating outside of the Washington system, so that you would have two types of economic operations underway without any real relationship between them. I can't say, I don't know. But what we should all be concerned about is Washington's drive for hegemony, because that implies war. I don't think the Russians or the Chinese will submit to Washington's will. They're not going to say, okay, we'll be a puppet state like France and Germany and Lithuania and England. They're not going to do that. The Chinese are not going to say, oh, let's give in to the Americans. They're not. I don't think the Russians are going to give in. And so if Washington keeps pressing these countries, the outcome will be war. And these are well-armed, nuclear-armed countries. And it means essentially the end of life. And therefore, this is the reason for the world to unite against American hegemony. This doesn't mean they should try to attack the United States and kill Americans. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means they've got to understand that the purpose of the ideology that's driving Washington is dangerous to the rest of the world. And the rest of the world should stand against that and stop enabling it. For example, if NATO were to break up, that would greatly reduce the American threat of war, because Washington would not have the cover. It couldn't hide behind NATO. It couldn't say, look, this is a common thing. We have all this coalition of the willing. We have all these other people who agree with us. And moreover, look, it's the important part of the world, Europe. This is Europe and the Americans. We are the important part of the world. And we've been dominant for so long by nature. We're the important part. So if NATO broke up, the prospects for the world would be much better. For peace, much better. We see no expressions in Russia that they are the exceptional people with the right to rule the world. They don't say that. There's no sign of it. The neoconservatives are American, they're not Russian. The Chinese are not saying, oh, we are Chinese, we have the right to rule the world. They're not saying that. They're not saying we are the indispensable country. We can impose our hegemony. That's not what they're saying. Only Washington says that. So this is the difference. And it's the reason that American power is dangerous, much more so than Russian power or Chinese power. Because even though the Americans claim that Putin is trying to reconstitute the Soviet empire, there's no evidence of that. There are no statements of it. There are no position papers But in the United States, we have enormous amount of evidence, position papers saying the new American century, the right of Americans to rule, history has chosen us. The collapse of the Soviet Union proves history chose American democratic capitalism to rule the world. All of this is in print here. It's known. And the world needs to pay attention. If they can't pay attention, they run the risk of being run over.
Mm-hmm. What do you think are the chances that Americans themselves would somehow rise up and demand an end to all of this?
I don't think the Americans know what's going on, or very many of them, but it could happen if the economy declines further, because employment opportunities here are dismal. People's incomes are not rising, but prices are. There's a lot of economic hurt in the country, and if the economy were to suddenly worsen, then people could be very disturbed about Washington's priorities. And there could be change simply from American internal deteriorating economic circumstances. That certainly could bring a halt to Washington's overseas ambitions.